Who gave Sung Jin-woo his powers in Solo Leveling? Now this is going to be a very loaded question that is essentially going to spoil the entire plot of Solo Leveling, if explained fully in details. So the short answer to this question is going to be a dude named Ashburn who is the Shadow Monarch. Now for those of you that don't care about being spoiled, there's technically two people that gave Jin-woo his powers. One of them being Ashburn, the Shadow Monarch, and the other one being a dude called the Architect. Now, I'm not going to explain everything in details, but something happened a very long time ago that made Ashburn seek a vessel in order to transfer himself to. And in order to find a suitable vessel, he partnered up with the Architect. So they basically made a deal with each other. The Architect would find a suitable vessel for Ashburn to transfer himself to, and then Ashburn would turn the Architect immortal. However, one day Ashburn got interested in Jin-woo, and his resilience to basically not die. So since Ashburn picked him as his vessel, the Architect went on to create the system to essentially make Jin-woo strong enough to be able to hold Ashburn's power. So all of those daily tasks that we see Jin-woo keep getting and all of those times that he levels up is because of the system that the Architect rigged for him. So those two guys are basically the ones that gave Jin-woo the powers that he possesses. The Architect made Jin-woo strong enough, and then Ashburn turned him into the Shadow Monarch, who has the most loyal subordinates between Jin-woo from Solo Leveling and Rimuru from that time I got reincarnated as a slime. Obviously this video is going to contain a lot of spoilers, so if you're anime only, this is your one warning to continue scrolling. Now before we answer this question, we have to look at how Jin-woo obtains his army of shadows, and that is by using the skill Shadow Extraction. As it was stated on the manhwa, the army of the dead will obey his commands. And as Jin-woo himself understood it, it's basically a way to enslave those dead monsters into his familiars. Outside of Belian, really, who was the only one that actually swore his fealty to Jin-woo because he had it for Ashburn before him, every single other shadow in Jin-woo's army was basically just resurrected into submission. Example number one would be the Shadow Greed, who was originally the S-ranked hero that basically had a lot of hatred towards Jin-woo because he thought he killed his brother. On the other hand, all of Rimuru's subordinates basically swore fealty to him. None of them actually had to do it. Rimuru even gave them the chance not to be his subordinates. So if you want to compare which subordinates are actually more loyal to their master, it all depends on what type of subordination you're looking at. If we're talking about blind subordination, then 100% Jin-woo's army takes the cake. Because Jin-woo's orders are the law and they have to abide by it no matter what. Now, if we're not talking about blind loyalty, then I would say Rimuru's subordinates are more loyal to him because they actually choose to follow him that way. But you guys let me know in the comments, what do you think? Whose subordinates are more loyal, Rimuru's or Jin-woo's? What would the manhwa Big Three currently look like? First and foremost, we need to clarify what the term the Big Three is for. And this was a name given to the top 3 best-selling manga in the Shonen Jump catalog during the early 2000s. It is not which one you like the most, it is not which one broke the internet the most, it is not which one has the most impact frames. The driving factor for being called one of the Big Three was sales. With that being said, it's almost impossible to track the sales of volumes for any manhwa, so I'm going to base my list primarily on popularity, including webtoons. And the first and foremost that I'm going to mention is obviously Solo Leveling. 100% would have to be one of the Big Three of the manhwa category, just because people that don't even know what a manhwa is know about Solo Leveling and Sung Jin-woo. Another one that belongs in the Big Three of manhwa would have to be Noblesse, or Noblesse, I don't know how to say it. This one was definitely at the top of the manhwa popularity until it ended and then Solo Leveling took its spot. A lot of people don't know that that actually comes from a manhwa just because the anime was a huge flop. But this one is actually one of the top most popular manhwas out there. Tower of God is also undeniably one of the most popular manhwas that there are, and in my opinion deserves a spot up there. Believe it or not, God of High School is actually a very good candidate for being one of the Big Three of the manhwa category. Unfortunately, the anime did not did the manhwa story justice and it completely flopped the story, but in my opinion it should be considered. And lastly, the beginning after the end. If you choose to consider it a manhwa, I know a lot of people don't just because the author is Korean American and lives in the United States, but this is a very popular one in the manhwa community. I completely understand that I gave 5 instead of 3, but those are just the ones that I believe 3 of those 5 deserve on the spot as the Big Three of the manhwa category. But hey, what do I know? You guys let me know in the comments. What do you think? Who are the Big Three in the manhwa category? I have had several of you come back to my video and telling me that it was actually a disappointment when Jin-woo said Arise to Igris. Now I'm gonna say this first and foremost, I have not watched the video yet, but I am 100% in denial that all of you are actually coming back just to tell me that this was a disappointment and a flop. There is absolutely no way I believe that this was such a flop and that Arise did not hit the way that it was supposed to. Now let me be clear, judging by the amount of comments that you guys are leaving on my video and the things that you guys are saying about Arise being a disappointment on today's episode, I don't think y'all had the right expectations for what was about to happen. There is so many of you comparing Arise to Bankai that is insane to me. You're actually thinking that Arise and Bankai weren't even in the same position. Let me explain myself real quick because, again, I don't think you guys are understanding what the scene was actually about. When we're talking about Bankai, that is a word that literally comes from the heart of whoever it is that is using it, because pretty much every single Shinigami can use a Bankai. Ichigo's Bankai scream is just iconic because everyone knows that it comes from the heart. Byakuya Kuchiki's Bankai is the chillest thing ever. Yama's Bankai literally made your skin crawl with the way that he said it. Like, that word means something. Arise from Jinwo is literally just a command to bring out the shadows. I've seen some of you comparing it to domain expansion. Seriously, guys? Domain expansion was also a command, but it aligns itself with the personality of the person that is opening the domain. It is not just a random command that everyone uses. When I made my video yesterday talking about Jinwo and the Arise scene, I wasn't talking about just the way that they were going to say Arise. It was also the delivery behind it. The way that Jinwo extended out his hand talking to Igris and he was just telling it, the dead knight already, there's no one for you to protect. Come back and serve me now. And then the moment after the command, how the scene just completely became something unreal. That side mirk smile of Jinwo. The way that Igris, the Red Knight, basically stood up and then just was named and it looked like that, that's badass. The way that he walked in front of Jinwo and then kneeled down, and every single other soldier kneeled down in front of him too. That is the entire scene that I was talking about, that the delivery was going to be a lot of pressure for them. I wasn't talking about just the word Arise and the way that the voice actor was going to say it. It was the feeling behind it, the delivery of the lines. I will be watching the episode tonight, but I 100% refuse to believe that so many of you consider it a flop. And I feel like the reason that you guys are doing it is just because the way that they said Arise, or whatever the word is in Japanese for it, wasn't just as iconic as someone screaming Bankai. I refuse to believe it. I cannot understand the massive amount of people that are disappointed with Jinwo saying Okiru instead of Arise in the latest episode of Solo Leveling. And I specifically made a video yesterday talking about this, and I got over 1,000 comments, pretty much divided between people that were okay with it and people that were disappointed. And I actually went through and read a couple hundreds of them, and most of the people that were disappointed is because they wanted a second I Am Atomic. For some reason, I am still trying to comprehend why is it such a big deal for you guys that he didn't say Arise in English. First of all, I don't know if you guys know this, but Solo Leveling is actually a manhwa which is created in South Korean. So technically speaking, Japanese is already a dub. It is not the original tongue. And I can guarantee you for a fact in the original word, he did not say Arise in the South Korean version. He said it in South Korean. Second of all, if you actually read the original word, you could tell that there was really no emotions behind this. Jinwo wasn't screaming, he wasn't overly emotional, and it wasn't coming from the heart or anything like that. He was just genuinely trying to convince Igris to stop trying to protect the empty throne and to follow him. So when he said Arise, the scene was more about Igris actually transforming into one of his shadows and following him than about the Arise itself. You guys need to understand that this scene wasn't about Jinwo getting a new finishing move like Kamehameha or a new transformation like Bankai. This scene was entirely about Igris being able to turn into Jinwo's subordinate. It was all about the delivery from Jinwo trying to convince Igris, and then he just calmly said Arise to him. There was a hell of a lot more emphasis on Igris actually transforming into Jinwo's subordinate than there was about him just saying Arise. And the scene was done perfectly because it completely followed everything that happened in the manhwa. Hell, I even thought there was way more emotion when Igris was actually walking and turning all into the Black Knight and all that. And then kneeling in front of him, that was badass. I completely understand everyone is allowed to have their own opinion and like their own things, but if you just wanted another I Am Atomic here for him to say it in English with low whispering voice or something like that, or if you wanted another screaming like Bankai when he said Arise, then you just completely did not understand what this scene was about. Because in the original work, it wasn't in English. There wasn't a lot of heightened emotions behind it. It was literally just Jinwo sitting there and giving a command. If you really wanted to be in English that bad, just go and watch the English dub when it comes out. Jinwo never should have been able to beat Igris the Red Knight. Now hear me out real quick. I know that Jinwo is the MC and he was going to win eventually, but this entire fight was so one-sided, I never saw Jinwo winning it anyway. Igris was overpowering the hell out of him at every single turn. And for some reason, mid-fight, Jinwo decided that he basically was going to pull away his little knife and just go at it old school. And then Igris decided to challenge accepted. Bro threw away everything that he had, including the cape, and he just said, you want hands, I'll give you hands. And let me tell you that bro did not hold back. Now I will say this, Jinwoo actually was able to hold his ground pretty well in the middle of the fight. Even though Igris actually used it as a web mop and just smacked the shit out of him. Like, bro was disrespected harder than I have ever seen an MC get disrespected. And then at the end of the fight, when he thought that Jinwoo was actually done, and he were Guardian Leviosa his sword back, Jinwoo decided to alchemy his little sword back and then went for the jugular. And you know what, I'll give it to him, he was actually smart and he was able to get the dub at the end. But if bro hadn't decided to be so chivalrous and actually didn't go hand for hand with him, this fight would have ended a lot differently, and then Solo Leveling would have only been 42 chapters long. This video is going to contain some massive Solo Leveling spoilers. How come Jinwoo's powers went from blue to purple halfway through the series? Well, the main reason for this, even though it wasn't really explained in the manhwa, is because he received the Black Heart. And what the Black Heart was, is essentially Ashbourne finally giving Jinwoo his full blessing and fully merging his power with him. If you guys remember towards the beginning, all of Jinwoo's shadows were basically blue in power. And this was mostly because it was naturally just Jinwoo's power. But after he received the Black Heart, and received Ashbourne's blessing, being the Shadow Monarch, Jinwoo's power then basically turned purple because they had merged and become one. If you remember throughout the series, there are some shadows as well that also I think become red. And I'm not talking about Tusk, we all know that he's just red from the very beginning. I'm talking about the little like fire or flames that are around them that start being blue, then some of them become red, and then at the end they're basically just purple. Some do say that this is basically the level of the shadows or how strong they are, but in my personal opinion, it's just after he received the Black Heart and he completely merged his power or Ashbourne's power with him, the Shadow's maximum capabilities just reached their absolute limit, and then he became the true Shadow Monarch.
This video is going to contain severe spoilers regarding Solo Leveling. Who or what was the Architect? The Architect is essentially responsible for the system that granted Jinwoo all of his powers, as well as the secret boss of the Double Dungeon, the one that we saw in the first episode of Solo Leveling. Except that when we first saw him, he was disguising as the statue that was holding all of the commandments from the Double Dungeon. But this does not get revealed until much later in the story. Essentially what happened was that Ashbourne wasn't successful in actually finding a vessel for his power. So the Architect saw this as an opportunity and he reached out to Ashbourne and offered his help to find him a suitable vessel if Ashbourne went to turn him immortal. Ashbourne agreed to the proposal from the Architect, and then the Architect created the system. Eventually he found someone that fit the criteria in order to be able to hold Ashbourne's power, but he actually didn't like him, which was Jinwoo. Ashbourne, however, was very taken aback by the mentality of Jinwoo that he had to basically never die, so he accepted Jinwoo as a suitable vessel, but he wasn't strong enough, and that is why the system basically helped him become strong enough to be able to hold Ashbourne's power. Once Jinwoo reached level 100, he was invited back into the Double Dungeon, where the Architect once again made him fight literally every single one of his puppets, or the statues. Then he had to fight the Architect himself, and after beating him, that's when Jinwoo was able to gain all of the powers of Ashbourne.